Good. All right, welcome to another episode of the Wealthy Retirement Show. I am your host, Dre Griggs. Thankful for another day together. Today, I'm going to do something a little bit different for you. So, today, we're actually going to focus on real numbers, real retirements, conversations that I have with people. I'm actually going to end with a live audit. So if you want yours to be one, you just have to DM me a handful of information and I will share that with you. This one, I've already talked to someone and I'll put this together. But if you are interested going forward, I'm going to add that segment where we'll do a live retirement risk audit. And I think that will be pretty exciting. Today, let's go through our normal same 8 different scenarios. We're going to go through a handful of situations that we have to deal with. The first one starting with our income blueprint, where the goal is to make sure we have the money that we need and that's able to maintain and for us to be able to afford our retirement lifestyle throughout the entire experience. When you're thinking about sequence of returns, I try to use the fancy words. It just means that if I lose a bunch of money at the beginning, it hits differently than if I lose that money in the middle or the end. And I'm going to pick nice round numbers for me to be able to show you exactly why that would be the case and, of course, how to solve it so it doesn't happen to you. There's a handful of retirement risks that we deal with. And this particular one we're going to go through and you'll be able to see it. When you're looking at 2 different portfolios, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them the same average return. And the reason I highlight the idea of the same average return is it's not as much about the average as much as it is when it happened. So when I say, for example, hey, I have a loss and I have a gain, but my portfolio average return is 10%, right? We're just going to make the math easy for me. Well, even though your portfolio is averaging 10%, did you gain 20% one year and then you lost 10% the next year? Because that would give you that average of 10%, or I guess it would be a 0% loss. And then you'd say I have a 10% average. Or did you gain 100% and then you lost, I don't know, 110% or however that math would have worked out? And the reason we care about that is because if you have the loss in the beginning, then your portfolio is going to end up losing money. And then when you grow, you have to gain that much more. So for this particular example, I remember I had a conversation with a couple. It was around the end of 2021, and they were getting ready to retire, and they had a lot of allocation that was still in the market. I remember telling them where I was like, hey, this is relatively risky for how close you are to retirement. When people tell me what their investments are, I will normally say, what do you want the money for and how soon do you need it, right? Like, ultimately speaking, that's why I'm a goal-based planner, because if you tell me what you want to do with it, I can tell you what makes sense. If someone says, well, I want this to be able to pay my mortgage, okay, well, that's going to be different than if someone says, oh, I have no intention of touching it. That's going to be different than if, well, I want to put something away for my kids for their college. And that's going to be different than if you say, well, I want to invest this for retirement in 10 years. That, depending on what the goal is, it's going to change where the investment would end up being at. And so when I met them, I was like, man, the fact that you have everything in the stock market is a little bit risky when you're that close to retirement. And the way I normally describe it to people is when I drive to Palm Beach to visit my folks, it would be a 4-hour drive. And I speed, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, nothing too crazy, but I speed less the closer I get to my destination. That if I speed at the beginning, I have 4 hours, I can make up a good amount of time. I can shave off, like 30 minutes, right? I can shave off a good amount of time. If I speed within the last maybe 20 miles, there is not much of a benefit. No matter how much faster you're going, you can't make up that much time. The worst feeling I feel that I could have driving is to get a ticket within the last 30 minutes of my drive. Because in my mind, I'm like, I'm driving 4 hours. I've been driving for 3.5 hours. I haven't gotten a ticket yet. I feel pretty good. When I get the ticket in the last 30 minutes, in my mind, I'm thinking, you took on so much risk, Dre, and there was not that much reward to be gained. Because there's only so much time you can shave with 30 minutes of speeding, no matter what. And I'm not really going that much over. So even if I was just going an extra 5, 10 miles over the speed limit, right, it's 10 miles in an hour. And so, like, in an hour, I don't have an hour left. I have 30 minutes left, and I don't have that many miles left. So I'm not saving that much time. So when I meet people and they have a decent amount of risk, and so I was meeting this couple. Did I know COVID was going to happen? No, I did not know COVID was going to happen. Right? I wasn't someone that was like reading the tea leaves, we'll say. But I'm someone that says, well, if we're getting ready to retire, we should take our foot off the gas and not take all the risk. So you have $1 million and you have a bad sequence. So let's say in year one, you lost 23%, right? So let's say we lost 23% in year one, which means that now my portfolio, when I have not retired yet, but now it means that my portfolio is going to be at $770,000. So even though I had saved up to $1 million, I had $1 million, I felt pretty good about that for my retirement income. I would not have felt as good if I was at 750, 770, $800,000. Would not have felt as good. That's why I kept working. But I lost 23%. And now it's as if I'm starting my retirement at that $770,000. And then I take my withdrawals. I'm going to make my life nice and easy for me. So I'm going to give us a nice even number for my withdrawal. And so we're going to say that they needed to withdraw $50,000. So you draw $50,000. That means I am now at $720,000, right? I am missing almost $300,000. And that is now my starting point. So if I have a bad sequence, I end up starting essentially as, I don't know, we could say that would have been like almost as if I retired 5 years early, right? Like I lost 5 years of my gains. That even if when you look at the stock market, and we talked about the Great Recession in 2010, if any of you had retired around then, that was a difficult time, right? The market lost 60% of its value, which is why we call that the lost decade. Because if you look at that time, the market returned back to its 2000, 2001 levels when the market loses 60% of its value. So it's as if you had not done any investments for 10 years. How would that impact someone's retirement if they lost 10 years of their investments? So for this couple, and there's different ways that people do it, and I see people with the YouTube videos, and they're like, oh, just take Tesla and you can retire off Tesla. Okay, that sounds good, but there's a lot of risk in being that concentrated. Where we'll say, all right, well, I don't want to be that concentrated in one stock, so what I will do is I will just take the S&P 500. I'll find an index for the S&P 500. Everyone says take the index, you'll be totally fine. Again, that sounds good, but the market, generally speaking, is going to lose its value as a whole. Look at the Iran war. The Iran war is causing the market to have some losses, some gains, and you're seeing it not in one particular sector, but it's the market as a whole. So now, if you are here, and then you have your year two, so now we're starting at this 720,000, and then I have my year two. Let's say the market has a great recovery. Let's say the market recovers 18%. Right? So let's say in year two, the market recovers 18%. That 18% of 720 means that I am now at $849,000, even with an 18% return, right? And so this was the situation that they were living with. What happened? Well, they had to sell in the down market. What happens then? I'm locking in my losses. That the losses aren't losses until we sell, so I've locked them in as a result of not having any other way to fund my retirement. And then we'll just say that they had whatever the next 3 to 10 years, we'll just say that they had good returns. So we'll just say we had good returns. We just had average returns. No harm, no foul. Well, what is the impact of us retiring and it just happened to be around COVID? Of us retiring and it just happened to be around the Iran war? It just happened to be around the Liberation Day when we announced the tariffs and everything. It's like, what is it if it just happens to be a weird economy? And now, I don't forget what it was called. It's always something where, what is it? There was there's something on the boat, right? On the cruises where people had some other virus and they just put, letters and numbers in front of it, where now we're tracking this new virus. And you're like, man, there's always something. And it's true. There is always something. So even though let's say you had this, you had the good returns, you're feeling pretty good, this would have taken off about 19 years. So you would have lost about 2 decades of your retirement income. So you would have been able to, so it read $1 million, we're basically saying you have $1 million, normal returns, you don't have the loss in the beginning, we just take our $50,000 every single year. That would have lasted you an additional 20 years. But because we lost the 23%, because the market did something crazy that first year, I lost $300,000. So I lost the ability to generate a certain amount of my income. Now, if we had a good sequence and nothing crazy happened, same average return, right? So this is what happened to someone where I was like, hey, this is not a safe thing to do when you're that close to retirement. And then if you were someone else where it said in year one, let's say we would have had a 22% return. So the first year, we just had a great year. We had a 22% return. That means that now your account, before you take anything out, is at 1.2 million. Right? So your balance is now at 1.2 million. You're feeling pretty good about that, as you should. You're like, man, I got lucky. I was retiring. Life is great. I had a great first year. You then would have taken your same withdrawal. So you still would have taken your $50,000 out, and then that would have left you with 1.1, I think that's 7 million, right? Look at that. Had a good first year. I took out my $50,000. I actually still have more than when I first started, right? No harm, no foul. Then as a result, what happens? I go through my same normal process. I have the normal good years. I still have the bad year. Right, I still have the 23% loss, but if I have the 23% loss in year, let's say like 9. So my account, I was about 1.2 million, I took my $50,000 out. It keeps growing on average or with the stock market around that 8%. Then in year 9, I have my 23% loss. Even though it happened in year 9, as you can see, my loss ends up, as my account is growing and I'm spending it, my loss, I'm still almost exactly where I started. So what is the net of that? You have 30 years of additional funds. And that's something that we just don't really have a lot of control over, but we receive the benefit or we receive the penalty. So as a result, I have literally an extra decade where my money was running out in year 19, and now I have 30 plus years and I'm feeling pretty good on that. Same average return is just the impact of when that ends up happening. So ultimately, what do we do to overcome this, right? To overcome this, you have to have some way to generate an income that's outside of the market, because the market is not a permanent loss until it's a permanent loss. And so there are people who retired around COVID, they had the loss the first year, and if they had the 3-bucket strategy, which is normally the one I talk about, so they would have had cash. You would have had 1 to 3 years of living expenses. So for them, that means that they would have had to have 100 to 150K because they need a $50,000 out. As a result, when you're dealing with COVID, I'm fine. I have the money. It's in cash, CDs, money market accounts. Totally fine. I can live off my conservative bucket. It's okay. So you're going to want that sort of a buffer that if you look at these events, a couple years after that, the market has recovered, right? So you go back to Y2K. 2 years after that, you're fine. Go back to 9/11. 2 years after that, you're fine. Go back to the Great Recession, and 2 years after that, you're better, right? The market hadn't recovered. 60% loss is a pretty big loss. But if you were able to allow the recovery to start happening, the market did recover from those losses. 2 years after COVID, totally fine. Actually, in a pretty hot economic market. And I would imagine 2 years after the Iran war, you'll have the same thing. You'll be like, I was able to maintain this. The middle bucket ends up being our income bucket. And that one typically ends up being like 3 to 8 years. And so we'll probably have our bonds in here. And we would have that. So they would have their bond investments. They were going to be able to live off of the interest. As a result, they have already set aside somewhere, and we easily could have put like 500K, right? It's like 3 to 5 years. So if I did, I'm going to make the math easy for me, just to make the math easy for me. So let's go ahead and put 350K here. So that way, that brings me to a clean 500. and then I'm able to still have 500 in the market. And it's really anything that you would consider your aggressive investments because we have other risks that we need to account for. If you could put it all in cash, then you would never have to worry about market losses. But the reality is, you would then have to worry about inflation. That if you could put it all in bonds, well, then you got to worry about the times when the market is recovering from a recession, where we had that 10-year period from 2010 to 2020, where you remember it was literally like a 0% interest rate. We just barely started getting back to having an interest rate a little bit higher because of the 40-year high inflation, where they were like, let's slow down the economic growth because we have 40-year high inflation. Well, you have the opportunity now to make a 7, 8, 9% from your market outside of your market investments. That opportunity was gone for literally a decade. So you can't have it all in interest and just collecting interest payments from bonds because that's too safe. You need to have something that is still in the market so that way it can continue growing. You can take advantage of the opportunities because historically the market is growing. That yes, there are really bad recessions, but it's normally around one every 10 years. Now, of course, sometimes our government gets a little creative where they have them more often, but they're really about one every 10 years. So we don't want to take everything out of the market, but we don't want to be so dependent on the market that we have to sell in the down market. So you give yourself the 2-year buffer, you're probably going to be in a good spot, 1 to 2, especially if you're planning on retiring. Then you can live off of that and you don't even have to stress about it. You still have your bonds to replenish your cash bucket. So you're still not touching your equities. And then when the market recovers and everything is grown, then you replenish back your bonds and your moderate bucket and you replenish back your safe bucket. That is what they were missing. And it's almost going to be the first stop. When someone's like, hey, I'm thinking about retiring, that's normally going to be the first place that we look is like, all right, well, if you're thinking about retiring, let's look at where your investments are. Now, for some people, we can have what I would call my guaranteed. If you have guarantees, then it puts you in a good situation because what will happen is if I can take my Social Security and my pension and I can cover my needs, then I'm able to then focus on having almost I don't need to have a safe bucket anymore. Like I may still want it because of healthcare expenses where if something happens and I have to have a large payment, I still don't want to have to sell it. So I'll probably have a little bit in a safe bucket or a little bit in a moderate bucket, but I can have a lot more that's invested in the market. The idea is just for me to be able to have something that protects me if the market is going down. And that is the goal. And that's basically what the main focus is. So for those that are able to create a floor where their Social Security and their pension, then they still don't have the issue where they're forced to sell anything in a down market. So it still puts them in a really good situation. And that's really all we're asking for. Because when you and I are stressing out, is because we're not 100% sure what to do with our money in those situations. Okay, let me clean this board off. Move on to the next one. Okay. All right, let me see if there is any comments. Yes, no, that's fair. I'm glad that made sense. And normally the second thing I'll look at what your allocation is, just what your overall risk is. And one mistake I see people make often is they only look at their risk kind of like for each individual portfolio, but you don't want to look at it everything. So I want to be able to put my allocations for my 401k, my IRAs, my Roths, my business, my real estate, how much risk is in these, and then aggregate that in a way where it's like, how much risk do I have overall? Because if you're just looking at individual ones, it does throw people off. And I see that relatively often. So that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So that puts you in a good spot. All right. So the cash buffer, ultimately that protects us in the short term. And then we're going to use the Roth conversion ladder to talk about our long-term protection. And the hope is that we're giving ourselves that tax-free income source and that we're able to draw on that portfolio during those times of recoveries. The only way I am able to protect myself from market downturn is by having income that's not tied to the market. And where I place that at, how I structure it, that's up to you. But I do want to show you how to be able to put together a Roth ladder and why people do that and when the best opportunity is for us to be able to do that. So someone had sent me a message, sent me a DM. She was 55. She retired at 52. She converted about $200,000 to a Roth, and I think she had said she did that over 3 years. But when she tried to withdraw it from her Roth IRA, she still had that 10% penalty. And she asked me, "It's like, Dre, what's going on here?" And I was like, "Look, I'll make a video about that." And then I'll answer her question, obviously. But normally I'll be like, I'll make a video about that. And so she didn't understand that there is this 5-year conversion clock, and that there is this 5-year rule. It's a very fancy way of just saying Uncle Sam more or less is okay giving us tax-free income, but the goal is to give you tax-free income for retirement. So Uncle Sam, with a lot of these tax-free vehicles, if he feels that you're just trying to not pay taxes, he gets kind of cranky. If you have, for example, in a life insurance policy, a whole life policy, it's called a MEC. It's like a modified endowment contract. It just is a very fancy way of saying there's too much money being put into this where it doesn't seem like you're trying to have some sort of a life insurance policy. It seems like you're hiding all of your taxable income with the monthly premiums. And there's a little calculation. It's like 7 years of your premiums is not supposed to pass a certain number. Won't bore you with all the details, but once it max, you lose some of those tax-free savings. Now, Uncle Sam he just gets a little upset. And so he does that where he looks at these vehicles and he's like, how are you using it? And I just want to make sure that you're not messing with me. So when you're 52, that means you're under the 59 and a half, and you don't have to have the penalty. The penalty is based on how we end up taking the money out and how long the money's been in there. And then once you're 59 and a half, you don't even have to really be thinking about the penalty at all. So what I would do is I'll show you what she would have had to do to make sure she didn't have that penalty when she retired, and ultimately what that ladder is. And we normally want to get started with our ladder where we all have this 5-year window. So let me go back and let me switch it. So what she would have done is she would have had to say, all right, if I plan on retiring at 52 and I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the amount of money that I have, where I'm sitting here and I'm like, all right, I need to do this conversion. How would that have looked knowing that you have this 5-year window? We would have started at 50. So at the age 50, we would have said, let's do a $60,000 Roth conversion. All right, so these are our Roth conversions down here. And then that would start the clock. So that would be year one. Remember, we said that there is a 5-year window where we would be penalized at 10% penalty, and we don't want it. Right? You and I, we're not trying to be penalized at 10% penalty. If she would have then converted that, then she would have paid the taxes on that conversion. We always have to keep that in mind. At 51, she would have converted another 60,000. Right, and so that is a rung of our ladder. This is what we're talking about when we're saying we're building a Roth ladder. That if we have these investments, then that would have been year two for the amount that I put in at 50, right? That would have been year two for the amount I put in at 50. We're trying to get to year 5. At 52, I would retire, right? So we said that we were going to retire at 52. And if we retire at 52, we're still going to do another conversion of 60,000 and moved a little bit. We're still going to do another conversion of 60,000. And that would be year 3. So now when I'm retiring, for most of you, your Roth conversion window opens the year after your retirement. Because for a lot of you, the income that you're making from your career, that it's going to be the highest generally right before you retire. It's part of why you're able to retire, because you have the amount of money that you need to be able to invest. So generally, it's going to have you in a higher tax bracket. Because of that, ideally, you're not doing the conversions the years right before you retire. If we're able to kind of put enough pieces in place, because that's not ideal, but it depends what the opportunity is. So she was like, hey, we got 2 years. And we're like, this is how you would need to set it up, right? Because this is why you had a 10% penalty, because you did not have the 5 years that you had set up already. So then at 53, or first year, she would have then had to live off of, right? For most of you, when you retire, you're going to have the other income sources. So for other income sources at 53, we would have then focused on living off of cash. So we had our cash reserves. You had anything that's in your already taxable account. So if you just had like a brokerage account or something like that, you would live off of that. We're going to keep it simple and just do the same conversion of $60,000. But when you're looking at the amounts, if there is this big gap, it's totally okay for you to say, hey, we're going to convert more because we have a bigger window, because that's what typically ends up happening for us. And then we would have done the same thing. So at 54, we would have converted another $60,000. And then when we did that conversion, we would have still continued living off of our cash bridge. We would have, whatever our investments that we'd have set aside, we would have been able to live off of that. And then as a result, by the time we turn that 55, we have now hit that last year. So now at 55, I'm able to start accessing my first Roth conversion. Right, so I can, if I want to, I can live off of that $60,000, and that is tax-free, penalty-free money. I made it. I have my 5-year window opened up. I built my bridge. I am now in retirement, and then each year, one of my $60,000 investments is going to be able to open up. And so she was like, that's how it works. Like, that's how it works. But rule number one, you basically have the 5-year opening for your first ever Roth IRA, and then it governs the overall earnings, right? So you have your earnings withdrawals. Rule number two, you have your 5 years from each individual conversion, and then that's the part that governs the penalty and the amount that you're able to convert and access. When you're talking about the withdrawal order, the order is normally going to be first your contributions, right? Because it's the money that you put in, so that's accessible. And then when you do the conversions, it goes from the oldest, right? So Uncle Sam's trying to work with us a little bit. And then the third is our earnings, and that's after 59.5 plus the 5-year clock. Once you're past the 59.5, and right, that's what I'm talking. Once you're past the 59.5, that penalty, that 5-year window, that stuff goes away, because we're at the age of retirement. So Uncle Sam isn't trying to be that. He's not that concerned with us. Now, one of the reasons I do really enjoy the Roth conversion is because as we're moving into that retirement age, your money that you take out of your Roth, now that you set the bridge up, that's money that doesn't count against IRMA when you're trying to qualify for Medicare. Right? Your Roth conversions don't count when you live off of your Roth. When you're trying to control some of your ability to access some of your taxes, whether you want to wait for a little bit later into your retirement where you're like, do I have anything to live off of? You've already set the bridge up. So yes, you don't have to access your Social Security as early. Some people are like, I just want to do it anyways, Dre. Totally fine. But now you have the option where you build the bridge where you can allow your Social Security to keep building, get that 8% growth every single year. That's the return on that. And then you can have this higher amount that will save you a little bit later in retirement where you don't have to withdraw such a high percentage, where you have that floor that's set aside. Also, it helps us when you're talking about dealing with sequence of returns, as we did on the first one. When I have the money that's sitting tax-free, I'm just creating another additional stream of income, and I'm trying to set myself up in a way that gives me the most flexibility, the most option, because you all hear me say it all the time, your wisdom equals your freedom, right? So your wisdom equals your freedom. Once you know what's going on, it gives you all the opportunity where Uncle Sam's not going to take more of your money than needed, and then you're able to give yourself so many options. We haven't talked about the legacy and the plans for your heirs, but you have the right timing, you have no penalties, and then you have the maximum tax efficiency when you're talking about just living your life in your retirement. So that is the way that one works for you. Now, the Roth ladder, as you all know, that's about building our tax-free income, which we talk about a lot. And then that normally leads us into where we do end up talking about, well, what about my Social Security? Because for a lot of people, it ends up being two halves of the same whole. And we talk a little bit back and forth about whether you should delay Social Security. People have different feelings on that. Last week, we talked about the impact on the provisional tax and taking it a little bit early and how you end up with that penalty. Everybody's like, all right, there's a lot that goes into Social Security, and it's true. And I want to make sure that you have the most amount of your money, because that is what Social Security is. That is the money that you paid in. And I want to make sure you have the most amount on it possible. Now, with that said, Social Security timing, because this is the bridge where we have it between us working and we have the required minimum distributions. So that normally sets up, as I mentioned to you before, that's your Roth window for 95% of you. When I stop working and before the required minimum distributions, whatever age that ends up being, those are the opportunities I have to be able to take this out. If you wanted to delay your Social Security, the reason that people would consider doing that is they're trying to find a way to reduce their early required minimum distributions and the needs. And then we're going to go through what is slightly counterintuitive of a strategy, but it is one. I tell you guys all the time, there's literally over 100 strategies for Social Security, and I want to be able to share a couple things that we will be thinking about. And I have another one a little bit later where we talk about the spousal and survival benefit, which is just another layer when it comes to Social Security. It's why that ends up being one of the higher research topics. Because if the government didn't make it confusing, what would the government do? Right? Like what would the government do if it wasn't making it confusing? And so this one we're talking about delaying Social Security. It's not, but this one we're not focusing on getting a bigger check. We're actually going to be focusing on protecting our portfolio from any of those forced sales. We're talking about when the market does something crazy. How do I protect myself? How do I ultimately end up saving myself? So let's go through it. So I retired couple, and they were 62, and they had, I believe it was like $1,800 a month. Let me pull up the numbers, and then I'll share that with you. Share that with you. Yeah. All right. Yep. It was Harold and Patricia. They were at 62, and they withdrew $34,000 a year. So I'm going to build out their scenario, their case study, and then you get to decide what you would do in their situation, what you think makes the most sense. So they were going to withdraw. I'm actually going to share this one with you. All right. So for their particular situation, when we're looking at Social Security, how do we set ourselves up? We have a retired couple of 62. They're worried about the portfolio not lasting. They're $1,800 a month in Social Security benefits. It doesn't cover their floor. So when I say floor, I mean like your water, your food, your electricity, your gas, your mortgage if you have one. That is going to be your floor. If we have our floor covered, then we don't have to worry about sequence of returns. We don't have to be as concerned about what the market is doing because I have my floor and my investments are now just for my luxury and my fun. But for them, they had $1,800 in Social Security. They had $4,500 floor on their investments. So they would need to withdraw $2,700 from their IRA. And then that is where you get the $32,400 a year. And that is if they started at 62. So we already talked about it during COVID, lost 23% of the portfolio. Like the rest of us, we're all dealing with that. And so they're selling their IRA shares at the bottom of the market to be able to have their life be able to maintain itself. And so that same $32,400 drawn down from the portfolio at 62 instead of Social Security at 67, where you have a little bit more. And my kid in my mind, the 6-7 just run. Right, we're gonna ignore it because I think they don't say it anymore. You know how kids are. The second that they leave something and you're still doing it, they then use that as an opportunity to make fun of you and call you old. Right. So we know that is how the kids are. At least my kids are. I don't know if your kids are that way. My kids are that way. What do you end up needing to do? Well, the only way you're going to be able to not take out Social Security at 62, and it's, like I said, there's a lot of factors that go into it. I know people feel very strongly about it. I feel like there's 100 ways to do it, so let's pick the best one based on the goals that you give me. I don't have the emotional tie to it. I'm like, man, right? But however you feel is how you feel. But you tell me what the goal is, I'll tell you how we achieve it. If you're trying to wait, then we need to find a way to pay for your bills from 62 to 67 or 62 to 40, which means that you have to build some sort of an income stream to be able to take care of that. Now, in the one that we just went through, you could have been doing your Roth bridge leading up to it. Or if we didn't already, then this will be the next best time for us to be able to do it. And so that would be your IRA bridge. So we live entirely on our IRA from 62 to 67. So we cover all of our minimum needs. And then if there's space in our brackets, which there normally is, because you're normally making more when you're working than you are when you first retire, we would then start doing our Roth conversions at that particular moment. So we would say, all right, from 62, live off our IRA, whatever's left in there, we're then going to do Roth conversions to be able to maintain a tax bracket. For most people, we try to stay either at the 0%. That doesn't work for everybody. So then the next one is 12%. And then we try to stay around the 20%. And anytime we have these opportunities, we take advantage of them. There's a variety of ways to do Roth conversions. And then for this particular one, based on the income that they had, we're able to do it at 12%. And so at 67, we're able to start Social Security now. What is that? Social Security is now $5,400 a month, which now we're able to cover their floor, right? And so now we feel a lot better. So they only needed $7,200 a year in their portfolio. Now we're in a much better spot. Not to mention that we have more tax-free money later. And you forget how important having tax-free money is. But when you retire and you'll be like, hey, Dre, I need $10,000. I'm like, sure, no problem. But then what will happen is you'll be like, hey, why was $12,000 taken out? It's like, well, we took out the $10,000 that you spent, but then we had to take out the $2,000 for Uncle Sam to spend. You're like, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, man, every time you take the money out, that's like your silent business partner. So every time you take the money out, you take out the amount that you need, and then you take out the amount that Uncle Sam gets every time you take it out. And people are like, man, that starts adding up, and it does. It starts adding up very quickly. And Uncle Sam gets on your nerves. The reason we waited for this one is solely so we could have the floor. Like, that was it. Depending on your risk and how you feel, some people will be like, Dre, I want an annuity, for example. And I'm like, well, annuity is risk protection. How about we structure our Social Security goals to basically give you that guaranteed income of the annuity, right? You're like, hey, I want to take out $150,000 from my IRA and I want to buy an annuity. And that's going to give me $1,000 a month, right? $2,000 a month, something like that. Now, but well, you do know if we took that same money and we just kind of lived off of it and then converted a certain amount of it to tax-free income, and you don't touch your Social Security, you'll have that same situation, except you'll relatively speaking be in a better position. And I'm like, yeah, because then we'll go into a little bit later because talking about your spousal benefits, et cetera, it just gets you in a really nice spot. And people are like, okay, I sort of exactly could see that. All right, so for Harold, here at 62, let me go ahead and I will switch us back to the whiteboard and I will show you what Harold's options were. So for Harold, we had at 62, 67, and 70. So at 62, Harold could have had 1,900. If Harold waited till 67, he would have had 2,700 or 2,700. The 9 was from the 1,900. That was throwing me off. He would have had the 2,700. And if he waited till 70, he would have had 3,348. Now, for any of you, your numbers end up being roughly the same. Once you know what your full retirement age is, it ends up being about 124% of what it is at 62, and then it ends up being 24% more at 70. Right, the numbers are relatively speaking, they're always going to sort of calculate out the exact same way. So we're sitting here with these options, and then so the wife. So this is Harold, and then for Patricia, she was going to be at $1,200. So Patricia was set at $1,200, and then their monthly income needs, they needed, oh, that looks like a W, but it's supposed to be an N. They needed $6,000 a month. All right, so that's what their needs end up being. We already have Patricia, she's set at the $1,200, so we would not have to worry or even think about that. She's going to take that one normally early. So there's going to be 3 options. You choose which one you think you would take. All right. So of course, right, plan A, we start now. So if we start now, we have the 1,900. And then we add that plus. So we're taking 1,900, we'll add that with the 1,200. And that would give us 3,100. I was sliding over. And then we would have to do 2,900 for my IRA to be able to set us up to be able to achieve the $6,000 that we need. As a result, that would be $35,000 that we're taking out of the IRA each year. If we wait till 67, right? And then we do, so this one we're going to add a little layer to it. I'm going to move this down just a little bit. So plan B, we wait until 67. So that would give us 2,700 plus the 1,200. And then we would have been doing conversions. So this would have given us the ability to do 30K in Roth conversions each year, along with the other amount that we would have taken out. And so now we're living right entirely off our IRA from 62 to 67. That would have been $72,000 a year. We then would have been converting that $30,000, which would have had us in the 12% bracket. And then we would have had that $5,400 in Social Security. Right now, we only need $600 a month going forward, right? So before we needed our IRA to give us $2,900 a month. And in this particular one, we only need our IRA now to give us $600 a month, because we have our Social Security generating $5,400 a month by being able to wait. Now, what do? Well, we lived off our IRA from 62 to 67. By living off of 62 to 67, we now have the increase, and now we're able to have the amount that we need where we have a smaller amount. Our portfolio withdrawal, it dropped from like $35,000 to $7,200, right? $7,000. And that is an 80% reduction in just the amount that you would have to take out. And while we did that, we did our tax-free Roth conversions, which will then give us the additional benefit when you think about the taxes of now, we don't have to take out the extra amount. So when we want to take out $10,000, there is no extra $2,000 to go to Uncle Sam. It's just the $10,000. So we have now no taxes. We take out less money. And that ultimately ends up giving you the additional benefit over like a 10-year span, because it just makes life easier for me. You're basically saving $24,000 a year, which means over 10 years, that is a $240K tax savings by being able to set it up that way. Now, it does require a little bit of planning ahead of time, no doubt about that. But you can see that depending on what we're optimizing for, what it is that you're trying to accomplish when you say your retirement, that puts you in a really, really good spot. That we have these choices. Now, everybody makes their own choice, but I just think it's a really good spot. And when you have that Roth window opening, to not let that window just close on you without taking advantage of any of these opportunities. And then like I mentioned, we'll go into a little bit later, where it gives you the benefit for your spouse as well. Because a lot of the times it makes more sense for the person who makes more, especially if there's a big gap, to be the one that waits longer. Even though the person who makes less starts taking the Social Security benefit early, one, to help pay our expenses while we try to help the other person make it. But then two, when the person passes, and we'll get into that a little bit later, that the person that's alive gets two choices. They can choose either to keep their own benefits, or they can choose to take the benefits that the other spouse had, right, as their survivor benefit. And it ends up being a very clear opportunity to make sure that Uncle Sam isn't keeping too much of your money. So you can see exactly why that sets you up that way, and it works pretty well. So that does set us up. And so I'll go in, I'll talk a little bit now about, just because I opened it up, I'll talk about the survivor benefits. I give you another example with a husband and a wife. And the reason I do like talk about this, and sometimes I'll talk about it from the perspective of home health care, because what I find to be happening all the time is I'll meet someone and they will think, Dre, I can't afford it. It's whatever. It's like $300 a month, $500 a month. It's a lot. I'm like, it's true. But that's for the whole thing, right? And so long-term care, it says that 7 out of 10 people 65 and older will have at least one long-term care episode, where it's on average 3 years, but it's over the life of your retirement, where you just have, you need additional help. That whether you're going to get treatments over a long period of time, whether you fell and need physical therapy, whether there has to be someone that visits you in the house, whether it's you or your parent, or right, like there's something that ends up happening. And what I have found is, even if you can get a small policy that just gives the spouse or or the kid, right, the child that maybe is taking care of you, that just gives them 1 day a week off. That you're thinking, well, I can't cover everything, so I'm going to cover nothing. And in my mind, if you're basically, that's a 24/7 job that you don't actually get any days off. And it ends up draining people a lot. Like it really does. It ends up taking a toll on people emotionally, physically, mentally. So if you can just get that person 1 day a week off where a home health person comes to the house, just does 1 day. That might be something that's a little bit more affordable. And I do think that that's a great option. I like talking about survivor benefits because it's just another perspective that we would shift when we think about how do we make sure that everybody's taken care of and we put people in the best spot possible. So it's a good opportunity. So I'll go ahead and I'll take it. So we'll do kind of the same thing, and I'm going to give you an example of where someone claims where the person claims at 62, person claims at 70, and we'll talk about what that difference ultimately is and how that impacts our spouse. Because I do think a lot of times when we think about retirement, we don't think about what happens when like one person passes, right? We have a two-income retirement plan, and we just assume it's always going to be two incomes. But then one income goes, the plan changes. And sometimes the plan changes a lot. When you're looking at your survivor benefit, so what we'll do is we'll set this up. I'll give you like a little T-chart. So if you have two choices, so you can take it at 62, you can take it at 70. So we're going to have the same choices again. So he had the ability to have $1,600 a month if he started at 62, or he had the ability to have $2,800 a month if he went until 70. Wife was like, "Do you know that you like rub your nose?" And I was like, I do. I just don't know why. I think I know why. When I talk, it's like my mustache is itching the bottom of my nose, which I know sounds crazy, but I think that that's what it is. So it's like I'm moving my hair down so that way when I'm talking, it doesn't itch, right? Don't talk about me, right? Just pray for me. Just pray for me. All right. So then my wife, so she has the benefit, and her benefit's the same, right? So that's his benefit in the choices that he has. And the wife has the option of 800, right? So we're going to say that's her. When you're talking about the benefits that the spouse gets, so let's say he passed away at 74. So we're just going to say he passed around the average, even though the average changes a little bit. So we'll say pass 74. So now that leaves the wife with a choice. The wife has the ability to go and have either her 800, but because it's the survivor benefit, she would then have the option to take over his 1,600. Naturally, for her, taking over the 1,600 makes the most sense. So she moves to his. So now she gets the 1,600 here, and over here she gets the 2,800. That does mean that the 800 stops. Right, we don't get to do both, which people do sometimes ask that. Like, no, so that means I'm going to get both. No, it doesn't mean you don't get both anymore. Now we're sitting here with these options. What does this ultimately, and then we'll talk into some of the details. Ultimately, that then means that my survivor's income is $1,600 a month, or my survivor's income is $2,800 a month. Which one puts her in the best possible scenario? Now, let's assume that she's going to live an extra 15 years. So if you live an extra 15 years, what's my difference? I would have had 28 and I ended up with 16. So then my difference is $1,200 is what her difference is. And if she lives for 15 more years, that is $216,000 that Uncle Sam gets to keep. And I don't know about you, I don't think Uncle Sam is responsible enough with my money. Because remember, Social Security is your money. So we're only talking about how do we make sure you get to keep the most of your money? Or for most people, the best option is going to be, if it's possible, for the higher income person, if we're a spouse, if we're like a couple, for the higher income person to delay taking their benefit, because it basically ends up becoming like an insurance policy for the other spouse. Now we have to look at things like our health and different things as far as trying to figure that out. But if everything's just kind of the normal situation, then that means that for most people, it's going to be the husband passes first. And so for most of the relationships, the husband's going to pass first. So and then generally speaking, when you talk about income in America, then the male generally will make more. And so if you have that situation, right, everybody's different. So I'm not saying that you have to do this, but normally if we optimize for the higher income person, that ends up creating the opportunity for the spouse, because the numbers show that if there's a couple that makes it to 65, there's a 50% chance that one of them lives to 90. Isn't that crazy? A 50% chance that one of them lives to 90. And if you next time you go to the card section, look for those Centurion cards. There's more and more of them popping up where there are people living to 100 and you're out there shopping for that Centurion card. It's definitely one of those things that we don't think about as often, but it'd be very beneficial. So what ends up happening is the rules are one person passes, then the other one gets to choose the higher of, right? You don't choose the lower, the higher of your own Social Security benefit or the deceased person's Social Security benefit, and then the lower benefit is gone. It's gone forever. So you can see that ends up giving us those options. So normally we will have the higher person delay as long as we can. Obviously, it needs to make sense. How do we bridge that? Did we do Roth conversions leading up to that? Do we set ourselves up? And then the lower income, they normally claim earlier because it's a part of us freeing up some money, get that money flowing in, so that way we don't have to try to bridge all of it. And then any time you have the switch over, then we're able to make that switch. Now, some people will say, and we just cleared up, actually, let me see if someone asked. Casey said it itches. It does. I appreciate you, my friend. I appreciate you. All right. One thing that sometimes I'll get a question on, and they'll say, all right, I thought it was 50%. And the difference is between your spousal benefits and your survival benefits. Your spousal benefits is the one where it's 50% of my spouse. Even if you're divorced, if you're just married for 10 years and you haven't remarried, you can take 50% of your spouse's benefits if that ends up netting more. Again, it's always the one that nets you more. The survivor benefit, that's the one that is my spouse is gone, and then I have the choice between their whole 100% benefit, or I have the choice between my 100% benefit. And you get to start that clock. You only have to wait for your full retirement age, even if so basically my survivor benefit, if they make it to 70, I don't have to wait till 70 to get their full amount. I just have to make it to my full retirement age, which will be the 67 for most of you, right? For most of you. If you start at 62, the penalty is a little bit higher, and you'll see that where they're a little bit steeper on the penalty, but it's just it depends on what we kind of set up. All right. Okay, my friends, we are moving and grooving. Okay. Let's move on, and we'll get to, so we still have to do our legacy layer. I have the one case that someone had filled out for the live audit, and then we still have our business one, and we're talking about the QC options, and then but before that, we're going to finish up with those decisions, and we will talk about the difference between your Medicare and Medigap. Now, the reason that this one's important is because a lot of the time when you're just thinking about them high level, most people, when they see them, like, look, obviously I'm going to take the Medicare Advantage because the monthly payment is about $0, right? Why would I do anything else when I already have that option? And we're going to talk about what the difference is between the two, because one gives you a monthly payment, but then it gives you more protection from the uncertainty. The other one doesn't have the monthly payment, but then you're going to carry the amount. Now, sometimes you won't really know. You won't really know until it's all said and done, right? Whether it was a good decision or not. But it depends. How healthy are you? How active are you? How much preventative care are you doing? Do you go to the doctors all the time? Are you traveling all the time? All of these things come into consideration when you're trying to decide what makes the most sense as far as the Medicare versus the Medigap. Now, what I will do for you is I will share with you a handful of those differences. Most people choose the Medigap Plan G. So that's what most people choose. And then the Medicare Advantage is the one where you don't have the monthly payments. So let's go through what some of the differences are. And I'll use an example so that way you can immediately say, okay, I can see how that would work or would not work. and then you can decide what makes the most sense for you. Okay. For you and me, the first thing that we're going to do anytime I meet someone and we're trying to decide which one, it's just going to be the calculation of our break-even analysis. How much is the monthly payment for the Medigap Plan G, which is what most people will choose because it covers the most things. Where if you're just basically keeping your normal health insurance kind of a vibe, then you're going to be paying for the Medigap Plan G. And the Plan G is going to be somewhere between like $100 to $300 a month, right? And we would then say, all right, well, what is my break even? And then we go from there. The cool thing is the network restrictions is really anybody. If you're paying for the bells and the whistles, then it's anyone that accepts Medicare. Anyone that accepts Medicare, you're good to go when it comes to your Medigap plan. And then your prior authorizations, because you're paying the extra amount, you don't have to go and get the referral of some of those HMOs and some of those more HMOs, or even, but your HMO and PPOs where there may be some of those extra rules, you don't have that. It's like, you know what, I'm paying for this. Both are offered by private insurance. So you would go to those little websites and you'd have to get the quote, you put in your name and all that stuff, and they give you the quote, and then you'll go from there. So I don't need any of those authorizations. And because of that, I can pretty much travel nationwide. So travel free, or we'll say travel easy. Every time I say free, there's always a conversation in my mind with my kids where like, that's free. And I'm like, that's included. That's not free. Like we paid for that, right? They'll be, oh, it's on Prime, it's free. No, we pay Prime, so it's included. Because there's something that you have to pay an extra amount on. They'll always laugh and they'll be like, "No, it's free," and I'm like, I don't think so. Anyways, switching back, you can switch from this to Medicare Advantage. So if you start here, you can switch if you wanted to. I'm just going to put Medicare Advantage like that. Right, so that's what that is. Hopefully you all remember that. So that's why people like it. If you're someone that's like, I'm okay making the payment, I would like to have as much flexibility, as much freedom, things like that. So then when you're talking about paying things out of pocket after you have your deductible, because there's caps on like across the board, you basically are just going to continue paying your Part B deductible. So that ends up being the max part that you pay, your Part B deductible, because everything else is going to have the caps that are created from your Medigap plan, which is why a lot of people end up liking this. The question then becomes, all right, well, what happens if I don't want the monthly payment, right? That's where the Medicare Advantage comes in at. Now, you may have heard this referred to as Medicare Part C, because that's the other way that it would be referred to. Because you have Part A and B, which is your normal, that's going to be the majority of it. Then you have your Part D, which is your prescription drugs. And then you have the Medicare Advantage, which is your Part C, and that's basically going to be your normal healthcare, where you'll have your dental and vision will be in this one as well. So for this one, you're normally not going to pay anything per month, or be a really small amount. So you normally won't pay anything. I've seen them as high as maybe $50, but for the most part, you're going to pay nothing. But then the max out of pocket is kind of where they get you at. So it's going to be anywhere from, so the max will be anywhere from $9K to $13K. Right, so you can start seeing, okay, how many of my monthly payments would it have to take if I had to have a full surgery of some kind that would put me at my max, right? So we'll talk about the break even, so you don't have to worry about that. But this is the type of things that you'll be thinking about. Now, as a result, you then would have a network. So you're going to have your HMO and your PPO network. And because you have a network, you're going to need that authorization. Where if you've ever had the HMO, it's like you have to go to the doctor to get the prescription to go to see the specialist that would do like your knee surgery or something like that you can't just call the knee surgeon. You have to get the authorization from your regular doctor. So that would be that type of situation that you would have here. So that you would need to have the authorization to be able to set that up for you. Because it's that type of a network, your network is almost always going to be local, which is going to be a problem if you plan on traveling a lot. Or at a minimum, you would have to start seeing what my out of network fees are to really be able to understand that. Now, if you ever wanted to switch from your Medicare Advantage, because the understanding is, look, let's be honest, right? If you want to go to paying this amount a month, you probably had to pay the max within the past handful of years. So you're going to have to be underwritten. And that might change how much your monthly premium is. And that's why we have that range. If we start early, the amount is lower, we're healthier, generally speaking. If we're later in retirement, especially if we just had a really big expense, and then we want to go to the Medicare, the Medigap with the Part G, where we have all these caps, we don't have to pay any extra out of pocket. They're well aware of that, so they have the ability to deny you. And it's just something you want to think about. If you switch from one, that you just kind of really, think about it. Think about it. So how do you normally would decide this? We would do what is a break-even analysis, and then like we mentioned, you're going to have to really think through how healthy am I, and what do things look like for me. So for this one, let's say that your break-even was $180 a month. So if you're spending $180 a month on your Medigap plan, that is $2160 a year. All right, so we're spending about $2,000 a year. And then when you have your Medicare Advantage in 1 year, let's say we got hospitalized, we went on the cruise where we caught something and we were in the hospital for a while. If we ended up maxing out as an individual, we already said that it was about 9,000, right? It was like 8,000 and some change. I just rounded it up to 9 to make life a little easy for me. So if you had a serious event and it cost you $9,000, well, if I'm paying $2,000, about $2,100 a month, and then I have a serious hospitalization where I have about $9,000 that it costs me out of pocket, but if I have, let's say, like 7 years of good health, well, then that would have saved me about $15,000 because I would have paid it. And so in this particular situation, if I have to pay, and I have this as event early, so that's what we're really talking about, like how healthy am I? Because if I have to spend the $9,000 on my Medicare Advantage plan within the first years, I only would have been paying $2,000. That's all I would have paid the first year for my other plan, and then it would have covered everything, right? And so I would have saved the extra amount of money. Well, that's what the trade-off is. So that's why it's going to be unique for each of us. So your Medigap plan, depending on that, is going to save you more or less. But it's important to know that you want to take the time to just be comfortable with your decision, because if not, it does become very expensive to switch back. And you do not want to be stuck with a very high monthly premium, because then it changes the break-even analysis, and then it's probably not going to work for you, or work anymore. All right, let's move on. Good deal. All right, so this one, let's talk about the brackets. We hinted at the net interest investment income, where we have these net investment income tax. It's like 3.8% that is added on to things. And the reason that we want to keep a track of our bracket is because most investors, they honestly don't even know it exists. And then when you see it, you're like, what happened here? But it is a tax. It's 3.8%, and it's on top of your regular capital gain. So if you would have had 15%, you actually have 18.8%. If you had 20%, then you actually have 23.8%. And it ends up being on the entire amount. And let's go through what causes, right, ultimately us to be hit with the NIIT. So I'll share with you the formula and why we want to be strategic. For this one, it's going to be a lot of time you end up either selling a rental property, you're going to be selling a business. It's going to be a large taxable event. The things that count as income is different. And so we'll go through and I will share with you the things that would count and the things that would not count. So first and foremost, let's start with what the formula is when you're talking about the in. Right, so it didn't move. All right, so I'm going to do this. When you're talking about the formula and the way it's set up, the 3.8%. So the formula that will be taxed, it is going to be the lesser of. And so you're going to have that 3.8% that is taxed, and it's going to be the lesser of your net investment income. Income. Or your modified adjusted, right? So my guy, that'll be over the threshold. All right, so that is a big where the amounts come from. So let me go ahead and I will start you off with an example. So let's say we had, David, and David is 67. David just sold his property, and when he sold his property, it had a 380K capital gain. Right, so David, 67, sold his property, 380K capital gain that he had to deal with. And so now, well, he had the gain of 380K. So from there, we'll then calculate what would end up being his modified adjusted gross income. So we know that from the sale, he ends up with 290,000. So he has 40K from his Social Security, right? So he has 40K from his Social Security, and then we said that he sold the business for the 380K gain. So then we'd have a 380K gain. So we're sitting there, and he basically has the NIT threshold. It applies to the 40K over that 250K threshold, right? So the threshold is $250,000 if you're married filing jointly. So add the threshold. So it's 250K if you're married filing jointly. It's 125K, which is half of that if you're married filing separately. And then if you are single, you get 200K. Uncle Sam said, I'll work with you a little bit. So 200K if you are single. So that's where the thresholds end up being. Now, once you're over the threshold, Uncle Sam's going to look and he's going to add that tax. If you're dealing with that, you're like, all right, what are the options that I ultimately end up having? So David, he sold his property. When he takes away the amount that he had invested into it, he's sitting there and he's like, okay, based off of what I made, what I expected to pay in taxes, I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot. And he did not expect to have those extra taxes added on. And so what ends up happening is it's not just the 40K over the threshold. Once you're over the threshold, it's on the entire amount. So the 380K gain. So what does that end up looking like? Well, if he was to pay 15%, so we have a 380K gain. If that would have put us at the 15%, that would have been $57,000. That would have been my long-term capital gains. That's what I would have expected to pay if I was at the 15%, but we're not. We have the additional 3.8% that we would then have added on, and that's going to add another 14,400. So 3.8% has another 14,400, and that is my NNIT. Like I should have lined it up a little bit better, because I was like, wait, no, that's what that is. Which now means I'm actually going to have 71,000 that I'll be paying in taxes, which I was not expecting, because I was like, oh, it's 15%. I have $60,000 I have that set aside. Where did that extra 15,000 come from? It came from that extra 3.8%, which then leads us to the next thought, which is, all right, Dre, I haven't really seen that. What counts? So I'm glad you asked. Let's talk about what counts so that you know. Then we'll talk about what doesn't count, and you won't be surprised. Because one of our Swiss Army knife is our ability to put the money inside of a Roth account. And so your Roth gives you those same advantages where they're not counting as well. Where looking at things that count is probably easier when you talk about the income streams. It's easier to talk about the things that don't count, and then basically everything else counts. So we're talking about the things that do count. Anytime you have capital gains, that counts. Anytime you have rental income, that counts. If your income is passive from your business, that also ends up counting. So you can sort of see we're something about income from your money working and not you working. That's basically where the line sort of is. So if it's passive business income, that would count. If you have anything from dividends or interest, that will also count. And the way Uncle Sam was trying to do it, he's like, look, man, I don't want to tax you for working, but if your money's working, I want to be able to add an extra tax, right? And so if you say, well, Dre, where did that come from? It probably came from the spirit of, well, we'll tax the rich, right? Because if you have these income streams, then right, you're not actively working. It's not your wages, so you probably have a certain amount of money. You'll say, all right, Dre, remember, we said it's at 250K. I think you can sort of see, well, the 250K, that's not matching. So let me let you in on the little secret. Your government does not index the amount with inflation. So that 250K was the amount in 2013, where it probably was, if they looked at a chart, they probably would have said, hey, this is the top 10% in the United States. It probably would have been something like that if you had me guess. And then they haven't touched it in 13 years. So even if you just had, basically, if you just had a normal 3% inflation, the rule of 72 tells you every 20 years, someone's income would double. So if you got a 3% raise every year for 20 years and you made $100,000, 20 years later, you will make $200,000. Same job, just your normal 3% with inflation. So you can see why you're like, man, why is that 250 seem like that's going to catch more people than just the, taxing the rich? Well, that's why. And the number is only going to get higher because they haven't increased it. Now, will they? I don't know. But what I do know is they haven't touched it since 2013. And if they continue not to touch it, that $250,000 is going to continue to become more and more normal. And more people are going to have to be strategic about making sure that they're not paying this extra 3.8% tax because it's happening. When you're looking at the things that don't count, so let me go down and say the things that don't count. So we'll say that don't count. So things that don't count is going to be your wages and your Social Security. I think you and I both would say, yeah, you know what? I feel like if you were going to hit me with that extra 3.8% of my Social Security, we're going to have some problems. If you have your IRA or your 401k distributions, Uncle Sam's like, come on, that's your retirement money. I'm not going to mess with your retirement money. And then any Roth withdrawals. And you can see why us setting up those withdrawals always puts us in a nice spot. Uncle Sam is blind to the Roth in so many ways. It's not just taxes, it's how things are counted, how we qualify for other penalties and taxes. It just puts you in a really good spot. So if you don't want that extra $15,000, you're probably like, all right, Dre, how do I basically end up doing this? I'm glad that you asked. So we'll say that there's 4 things that you could do. Number 1 is you could just make sure you're below the threshold. So in this particular example, if you're selling real estate, if you're selling a business, is it possible to have the payment spread out over maybe 3 years? Where it's like, hey, I'm going to have this amount. What happens if you spread it out over over 3 years, what would that end up doing? And you'll be like, all right, that actually would lower my capital gains to any individual year below that threshold. So I don't have that extra $15,000 tax. You, of course, could have your Roth withdrawals. That doesn't count in your MAGI, so you're in a good spot there. And then you could do tax loss harvesting to offset any of the gains. Where I think in episode 2 I went over tax loss harvesting. It's just that we're looking at your investments. You're like, hey Dre, I have this sale. I'm gonna have a bunch of income and capital gains that I'm gonna claim. We can look through the investments and see if there's some losses that we can offset the gains with. As long as you have the gains to offset the losses, you're allowed to reduce it. And then that puts you in a pretty good spot where you're able to keep more of your money, because that's always the goal. The goal is always the same. When I say wisdom equals freedom, it's the idea that the system is designed to make lifelong employees, right? That's how the system works. If everybody was able to retire, at like 25, the system would struggle. We already can see that they're struggling to find certain jobs for people currently, that there's places that are just always looking for people. If we're able to do that, the system will be like, man, we struggle. It's sort of the same idea when you're like, hey, why don't we have flying cars? From an infrastructure perspective, right now there's so much economic incentive to just have the roads, right? If you think about driving down a highway and then you exit, what do you see when you exit? You see gas stations, you see hotels, you see restaurants. From an infrastructure perspective, that would end up crippling our economy. It's not that you couldn't fly in a car, it's that people wouldn't stop to get this stuff. That's why when you go to gas stations, sometimes they will charge you an extra fee if you get your gas outside of walking in the gas station, because they charge you so much for all the trinkets in the gas station that they want to encourage people to walk inside so they can make their money. Now, there's so many parts of our economy that is completely built off of that COVID really exposed that. When you think about that people weren't driving, that it kind of trickled through a bunch of different industries. We're like, oh, they are all connected. So we have sort of this thing where I don't want people not to work. So what do I do? And you find that they end up controlling your wages, and they tie your wages against the cost, where we raise the cost a little bit higher than wages. And you can see the data, it shows it over and over again. So you end up finding that as you make more, the costs are outpacing the income that you're having. And why? What ends up happening? Well, it's very hard for people to then separate their time for their money so they can have the extra money to put it to work. But we do have to find ways around that. But there's no doubt that the system is making things more difficult than it needs to be. And that this is our goal then, is basically once we know how the game is set up, hopefully we can avoid the traps, give ourselves the opportunity, purchase all of our freedom, purchase our family's freedom, and then we're able to live a life on our terms. We can still work. Why not? Right? Retirement is less about age. It's just more about, for me, separating your time for your money. And as I show you these, you're like, okay, I see exactly what's going on. I can see exactly where the government puts these little tax traps to try to take a little bit more of my money. Also, it's important, when I'm just saying you worked hard for it, why not give yourself the ability to keep as much of it as possible? Like, right? Why not? Invest it, give it to those that you care about, and match it with your values. So that is the net investment income tax that most people have not seen or heard of, and it just shows up on your tax bill. And you're like, where did that 3.8% come from? That's where it comes from, my friends. All right, so as always, we start off with a lot of the individuals. So let's now move on to our business owners. So if you're a business owner, you find yourself where Uncle Sam is just always taxing you. Now, if you're just using TurboTax, it may or may not, I'm not 100% sure. You have a CPA and you probably have a good one. They're probably mentioning this to you. But we want to talk about your qualified business income deduction. So as a business, we have opportunities, and it's set up. Remember, we have an incentive-based tax system. Very fancy way of saying that Uncle Sam is okay bribing us. If out of all the things that you may like or not like about capitalism, out of the different versions of how does the government control its people, it is the most beneficial for us, right? Because if you have socialism, if we structure it in the right way, then obviously it's very beneficial. If the difficulty is, how do I incentivize people to do things that's betterment for everyone? That, yes, ideally everybody is a wonderful person and we set things up in a way that benefits everybody. But we also acknowledge that everybody's not a wonderful person. So how do we incentivize people that are kind of off the rocker? As a result, you end up most governments then will end up threatening you, right? Like, so ultimately, it's a carrot and a stick. Capitalism, because you are bribable, everybody is economically incentivized. They'll do something that makes sense to them, and they'll do it as long as it makes sense, right? That's basically all economics is that everybody can be bribed economically, that if it makes sense for me, I'll do it economically, that everybody does what makes sense for them. Even if they're wrong about it, they're doing it and they think it makes sense, and we'll do it as long as the benefits outweigh it. As a business owner, you have an opportunity and to take 20% of your income and to be able to have that not to kind of be not counted. I'm going to show you how we're able to put a couple of strategies together to really set yourself up. So the qualified business income deduction is a 20% deduction on your business income, and it came with the Tax Cuts Job Act. I think it was the first one of 2018. So if you're self-employed, this is going to be one of those. I met with a business owner, and this was probably around 2023, so it had been out for a handful of years. And we were looking over the numbers, and they were making about $180,000, right? So they're making about 180K net. They had 180K that was that was left over, and they had never heard of anything that has to do with the qualified business income deduction. They're like, well, what is that? So as a result, they were paying taxes on the full $180,000, and that would, at the time, that put them in the 32% bracket. Let me clean that off. So if you're sitting there with $180,000 in 2023, you would have paid 32% in taxes. There we go. Clean that off. So you're paying 32% in your taxes. And if they would have been able to deduct 20% of that $180,000, that would have been $36,000. So if we could have been able to use that to deduct our 20%, that would have been $36,000. And they would have been like, oh yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. That would have been from their taxable business income. As a result, what is that? So if we took 36,000 and you multiplied it by 32%, that would have been 11,500 bucks. All right, so you take 36K, multiply it by the 32%. So that would be about 11,500 that you would have saved in taxes every year. You know, what would you have done with an extra $11,000? I don't know. You would have maybe taken the kids on a cruise. You may have expanded the business. Who knows what you would have been able to do with that extra money that would have been in your pocket. If that was, and so we're thinking about it from when it was, that's about 5 years. So then if you have 5 years, so that would have been about $57,000 that Uncle Sam would have taken that he should not have taken because they just weren't aware. So that would have been what we would call an overpayment. Now, the good news is you are able to amend your last 3 years, and that's what they did. Oh, I forgot. So we amended the last 3 years, and that means that they were able to get about $34,000 back. They said, hey, can I get the money back? And Sam's like, yep. I didn't know that you didn't know you couldn't do that. I just assumed you wanted to give me more money. You and I said, no, Uncle Sam, that is not the plan. I'm not trying to give you extra money. Feel free anytime to send me back anytime I overpay you, right? Uncle Sam's obviously not going to do that. When you're looking at the deductions of 20%, it's going to be with all the business, sole proprietorship, partnership, S Corps, LLC, right? Anything that's basically going to be categorized as your business income. So it does have income limits, as most things do, and then it has where it phases out, and then the phase outs are a little bit different. So it ends up being around 197,000. Right, so I'm going to say income limits. If you're single, it's 197K. I think there's a little bit extra on that, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. It's like 197, like 300 or something like that. And then you have double that. So if you're married, you have 394K. So we'll say married filing jointly. If you make over that, then the option doesn't work as well for you. So one thing that I will do sometimes with people is we'll say, all right, if we're over that, maybe if depending on your business structure, we can open you up either a solo 401k or a SEP IRA, and then the money that you place in there would then lower your overall taxable income, and then it could bring you back under the limit. And you can have both of those pieces working together, where you're saying, all right, if I'm able to set it up for myself in a way that I can put up to, I think it's like $70,000 in my solo. So now maybe I'm back under the limit. And then I'm able to take off the 20% deduction because I still have the amount now that I qualify for it. So now I'm continuing to work through and saving taxes. I would then take the money that's in my solo, then I would wait for those Roth windows, and then I would do those conversions as I get ready and work my way through retirement. And you can see how it's a seamless process where there's opportunities along the way. And if you're not sure what stage you are in the retirement process, I do encourage you to go to obsidianwisdom.com, and you can go to /assessment, where we have a tax stage assessment, and it will tell you which stage that you're on. And then it will tell you what then makes the next three moves, what your next three moves should end up being. For this particular one, they weren't aware that they had the ability to write off a certain amount. Just like when I meet people and they're not aware that they're over the amount, where they Googled it and they knew it was available, but they didn't know about the income limits and that they didn't qualify. And then they give up. But then at the same time, they didn't know that they had the ability to lower what their overall income was. And then you have the opportunity again. So on that one, let's transition from business owners and let's start talking about the overall deductions that you could work in the legacy layer. We're talking about an inherited IRA, that you do have you have a 10-year rule, and just overall what the beneficiaries, what we should know. So while we just talked about one of the benefits of the Tax Cuts Job Act, one of the costs is we lost what's called a stretch IRA. In your stretch IRA, just sort of as it sounds, you used to be able to stretch out your IRA payments for, I won't say forever, but for a really, really long time, where you could take in the smallest amount of income and not really move your taxable income up that much. And so I had a client, their father had passed away, and they left $620,000 in a traditional IRA. And then the son, he was 44. And so he had the 10-year rule. The son was like, hey, you got 10 years. And like a lot of the times we sort of procrastinate a little bit, where we're like, oh, if I have 10 years and I have plenty of time. And you're really like, no, you don't have that much time. You have time, but not that much time. That the years, they just go by like quicker than we would ever imagine. So we're sitting there with the $620,000 that was passed. And when that amount gets passed on, sometimes the problem that we run into is a lot of times you are going to be in your 40s or 50s when you inherit these. And what do you kind of know about your 40s and 50s, right? So you know that you're probably going to be making money. You're probably going to be in some of your highest income earning years, even if nothing changed except you just got an inflationary increase. So it just puts you in a tough spot. It sometimes is like, all right, if it's able to be handled ahead of time, if you're focused on legacy, then if we can handle it ahead of time, then we know that Uncle Sam is waiting to take our money from us, right? We know he's waiting to take the money from us. So ultimately, what do we need to do to make sure that the money goes to the people that I care about? Because Uncle Sam already set it up where you have a 10-year window, and he also set it up where if the RMD's already started, you have to keep going. Right, we must keep going. Because of these extra rules that were added, we know that we need to be strategic, that depending on how much money is in there, it's possible with the money that I'm making and how much I'm going to be taxed, that it ends up having Uncle Sam is taking a large percentage of the estate. You're like, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. I agree. It is not supposed to be that way, but it does happen. So we had the $620,000. The kid was 44 years of age. He didn't start right away with the 10-year rule, right? It was like, hey, what do you want to do? It's like, well, let me kind of think about it. And so a couple years goes by, and then you're forced to take out about $62,000 each year. Right, so we're saying the 10 years that we have, so 620,000 divided by 10. So you have $62,000 that you're forced to take out. And that moves him into the 32 to 35% tax bracket because of the money that he was already making. Right. So it moved him there because of the money he was already making, which you and I, that's not the goal that we have. So for him, so the son was making, in this particular situation, was making about $175,000. And then once he had that extra $60,000 that was added on, it then moved him to $237,000, which moved him to that 32% bracket. And if you're at the 32% bracket, and that's what's going to happen each year, right? So he makes 175, you have 62K each year. That gives you 237. So that puts you in the 32% bracket. If you then were to take the 620K and multiply that by the 32%, then that means that Uncle Sam is going to be taking, let's see my calculator. So he's going to be taking, right, it's about a third of that. So he's going to take about $200,000. Now, for most people, if you in your mind, you're like, no, right, I have 600,000, it's going to be passed to my heirs, generational wealth, it's going to put us in a great spot, it's going to change their future, they're not going to have the same struggles I did. And then you found out that Uncle Sam is taking a third of it. How would you feel? I think for a lot of people, you're like, that was not the plan. My goal was not to give Uncle Sam 1/3 of my generational wealth. That wasn't the plan. But that's what ended up happening because of what just typically happens. If we pass around the national average around that 75 to 85, if we pass around that time, then our kids, generally speaking, if you just go by, I have my kids somewhere in my mid to late 20s, that means that your kids are going to be somewhere around their mid to early 50s. And they're going to, in their highest income earning years, on average, for the average American, is going to be your 50s. And then right when you retire. So if that happens, then that's why Uncle Sam added the 10-year window. That's why he set the rules up that way. He's like, all right, well, I don't want the widow, right? So if you're the spouse, I don't want the widow or the widower to have 10 years to spend it all because then they're going to need me, right? That's what Uncle Sam is thinking. So I will let the widow or the widower, I'll let them spend it however they see fit. Because I know that they're retired. Now they're in a one-income household. Their Social Security is going to adjust. I know that's going to be a tough situation for them. I don't want to force them to take out all the money in 10 years. And thankfully, that was something that was at least mentioned and accounted for. But as far as everyone else, the Tax Cuts Job Act of 2018, by putting a 10-year window on everyone else, Uncle Sam is well aware that means that for a lot of people, that's going to now have a third of that money being taxed and taken back by Uncle Sam. He's well aware. There's no other reason to give you 10 years to be able to do it. So he's like, look, I'm going to be able to set them up and I'm going to be able to take more of the money. If you are bothered by the idea that Uncle Sam is setting it up, the way I describe it is even if you give Uncle Sam all the benefit of the doubt, it would be like going to a casino and sitting at a blackjack table. Because of the way the game is designed, just by the dealer giving you a card, it's already tilted in the house's favor. The dealer didn't do anything wrong. The dealer didn't like hide cards, did not try to screw you over in any active, unethical way. But just by you sitting down, you're well aware that the game is designed where the casino has the tilt. That if you play for a long period of time, and unless you're in the handful of people that are really good math, numbered card counters, you will lose money over the long term. That's why casinos are designed without windows. They don't want you to know how long you've been there. That's why they give you free drinks and different things like that. They want to make sure you're not counting the cards. So they do all these little things to give them the house the edge. So the dealer doing nothing wrong, just giving you a card, helps the house take your money. That is the way that Uncle Sam has structured some of these things. There is nothing inherently wrong being done, but because of the way the game is designed, just the dealer giving you the card, you're already set up in a rough spot. And so that's what ends up happening here. So you end up losing a third of the money just by the math and only having 10 years. So then what is the option? If you're focusing on generational wealth, what is the option to make sure that the money goes to the people I care about, goes to the causes that I believe in and support? Last week, we talked about setting up Roths. We talked about QCDs, qualified charitable distribution. We talked about a handful of them. Today, we're going to focus on the heirs. Like, what do I do to make sure that my kid is able to keep it? And so for this particular one, what if we did Roth conversions to start moving some of the money out? Because remember, the only reason we have all these tax rules and it's designed against us when we're talking about your IRAs and 401ks and things like that is because Uncle Sam has not collected tax revenue from that investment ever. It was tax deductible when you placed it in there, and it grew tax deferred, so you have not paid taxes on it ever. So now Uncle Sam sets up all these traps, required minimum distributions, the 10-year window. He sets up all these traps for that particular account. If you are able to place it in a Roth, outside of the fact that it's just tax-free, if your goal is generational wealth, then there's no limit on when they can spend it because you paid the taxes ahead of time. So what we would do is we would say, all right, what are my Roth window? We don't need to have you do it where you're paying the 32% because then it's defeating the purpose. But what if you had, let's say, $50,000 of room where you could do a conversion and you did that for 6 years? Right. So you said, hey, look, I'm looking at my tax brackets. I'm able to maintain a lower taxable amount and I can go up to $50,000. No harm, no foul. I didn't need it to live off of. I'm just doing the conversion. So then we're able to move that $50,000. That then leaves $320,000. Let me scroll down. Right. So we have the 620. So we have the 620 there. That lowers us to 320. That is now left in there. And then we have $300,000 that is now going to be in my tax-free amounts. As a result, now when it passes on to my son, same situation, even if we have the same tax bracket of 32%. So let's say it just kind of is what it is. There was nothing we could do about it. Even though now we only have 320, so we're going to do 32,000. But let's just say we still have the same 32%. Well, 32% on 300,000 is now only $102,000. So if you were to do the 32% on this, well, now that is only 100K, right? It's still a third of it, but now it's 100K that we have in our taxes. And as a result, now Uncle Sam, he's getting half. He was going to take 200,000. Now Uncle Sam is only able to take $100,000, so we feel a lot better. And then we can hand over the other $300,000 tax-free because we already paid the taxes on it. So for our son, that saves them another $100,000. And then for us, because we were strategic about it, it's not impossible that we're able to do it at a 0% bracket. If we have the low enough income years, but at minimum, we're able to do it probably at the 10%. I would say the 15% would probably be at the absolute highest. We're able to pay, even though we paid some taxes, possibly it would have been half of what the other taxes would have been. Then that puts our kids in a good situation and we don't have to really think about it as much. So we feel really good about that, just being able to set them up. And so that is the generational wealth one. So that is the inherited IRA. And we are at the end. We're at the end. So we're at the end where we get to do the audit. I'm excited. I am excited. So it's going to be our first time doing it. So you got to bear with me as we work through it. But I feel really good. So my goal is to close each show with a plan review. And I will place where it's a little bit easier right now. If you're just like, hey, I want to set one up, message me or DM me, comments, whatever, reach out and just be like, hey, Dre, I'd like to be able to set it up. I'll send you the form, you can fill it out, and then you could be on a future audit. But for this one, for our first one that was able to do it, I'm excited to be able to go through this. So normally what we'll do is when I do an audit, it's normally going to be broken into 4 sections because it just sets the tone and puts us in a good spot. So question number 1 is, what do they have and where? Oh, I didn't switch it back. So we're doing an audit. Number 1 is what and where for your investments. From there, I'm normally able to then say, what is your current tax situation? And if you wanted to, you could obviously do this as well, because we're going to be looking to see what the risks are that we have. As you've already seen, then we say, what are some future problems? When you talk about the sequence of return, we're like, man, we got a lot of market risk. If someone has everything out of the market, man, we got inflation risk. If someone has everything in a pre-tax account, we'll say, oh, we have a ticking tax bomb. That there are certain things where you see it and you're like, okay, I can sort of see what's going on here. And then you end by saying, all right, how to fix it. That for most of us is going to be the most reasonable spot to end at. I was like, all right, cool. What we have, where it's at, all right, that's great. Based off of that, what are we seeing? And then we can keep going from there. So let me pull up what they have, and then I will fill it in. So for them, what we have I'm going to say H for him. And wow, I completely messed that up. All right, don't judge me. Okay. So for this particular one, we have 700K and the 401K. We then have, I'm rounding them up just to make it easy for me. All right, so we have the her. Oh, okay, I did not think about that. So we're going to say wife. So that's the husband, that's the wife. So the wife has a 403B, and she has 200K in there. All right, so we got about 900K in pre-tax. We do have a Roth. So the husband has a Roth, and he has 22K in there. So the husband with the Roth, 22K, congratulations. It's always good to have that. His brokerage account, which is only, like you said, it's just basically index funds. So this is going to be a joint. So your brokerage is going to be your after-tax money. It just means that it came from your checking account. You already paid taxes when you receive the income. And then I believe they have a joint, that's their cash. And that's with their bank, so it's like a high yield savings account. And they have 30K in there. So that is what they have and where. So the Roth would normally, and then I'd say, hey, when did you start the Roth? But I'll do better because I did not ask them. So I don't know. That ends up adding up to 920, well, my calculator made me. So I have was that 22, the 50, so that's 80, that's 980, so that's basically $1 million. So we're just gonna say that. All right, so based on those accounts, I have $1 million. Congratulations, this is a good spot to be. So you're feeling good in the neighborhood. I would then normally say, all right, we have the money, but what does our income look like? And so for them, I would start asking, I need to know what the floor is. So we would then ask for things like Social Security, and we did. So while I didn't ask how many years they had on their Roth, I did ask about Social Security. And their Social Security at was like 30, yeah, 3,200 combined. And they are both working. All right, so this is like my income. All right, so they're both currently working, and we have what, 70, 30, so they make 200. So they make 200K combined. So they have a household of 200K. All right, so then we have our income, and neither of them are retired yet. So they're right, doing a great job. You have self set up in a good position. And then we go what the needs are because that's how we would know what the gaps are. And they needed $7,000 a month or $84,000 a year. So their retirement income needs would be 7K a month or 84,000 a year. Right. So then that would set them up in their retirement. So we're good there. When you say, all right, Dre, based off of this, what would you say are some of the problems that you notice right away? And you could probably know what one of them I'm going to say is if we have $1 million and I'm seeing that we have 900K, that means we're like 90% of our money has not been taxed yet. So I would immediately probably note that we have 90% of our money not taxed, which then means that we're trusting that taxes will be lower or the same in the future, and where you feel super confident that we're going to have lower income, once we retire, that we're positive our tax will be lower in the future. That's the only way that would work out. Now, what we do know for most of us is we typically are just like, this is the plan that we're generally given. That's what the system is like, hey, this is how you should do it. And that's normally how most people I meet end up having their money. It's tough for a variety of reasons. One is you can't touch it until 59 and a half. So you have an emergency, then you end up with penalties, and you have like withdrawals, and then you got to pay the loan back, where the money is tied up, and it's tied up, especially if you're like 30 or 40, you're promising to just leave this money here and not touch it, and the returns aren't guaranteed, and we haven't even talked about the fees in those accounts. So that's just normally something where I think that ends up being a blind spot, and we do want to strongly really kind of look at that. So we'll start with where their current tax are. So if you're around 200K, then right, if you look at a bracket, I don't know what all their deductions are, but that will put them around, just the 200K will put them around a 22% tax bracket. And because they're at the 200K, we have no IRMA concerns. Currently, IRMA is set at, it's like 208,000. So they're super close. But currently we don't have one. So I might just mention that. I'm like, hey, this is the IRMA floor. Just something to think about. With the 22,000 that we have in a Roth IRA, we're not doing any Roth conversions. So that is something that I would want to be able to look at the whole window to see if there is an opportunity to do some sort of Roth conversion, right? I would be like, hey, is there any opportunities for us to be able to do that? If we were then saying, all right, based off what we have and our portfolio, we would normally start saying, what is the floor, right? So the floor, that the bare minimum that we need, and how we're going to be able to accomplish this. They told us it was $74,000. We said our Social Security, they don't have any other pension. So with their Social Security being combined at $3,200, and that would put them close to $40,000. I clearly would need to move my 3 and 4 lower. I didn't realize I'd write this much, but it's the first time, so we're going through this together. So Social Security is going to be about $40,000. I needed 74,000, which means that I have a $34,000 gap. Right, just kind of on the back of the napkin, like, all right, so I have a 30, so I still have this gap. And so I would then take the amount that I need, and I would divide that by the amount that I have. So I would take that 32,000, and then I would divide that by my portfolio and the amount that I have inside of my IRA. So right now I'm not going to be thinking about my taxable account. I'm definitely not thinking about my tax-free account, because normally when we're first starting, we're going to take the amounts out of our IRA. And so I have about 900,000 in there. Ooh, I don't have my calculator. We're gonna just do the rough number. No, I can do it. So I'm gonna take the 32,000. I'm gonna divide that by 900,000, and that ends up giving me around a 3.5%. Gives around a 3.5% withdrawal rate. The reason I want to have that, it was 34,000 and 300, but I basically took the 34,000. I then divided it. So I took the gap I needed. I divided that by the portfolio. So that was 900,000. And if I do that, that gives me about a 3.5% withdrawal rate. The number changes as far as just a quick and dirty, where we used to say the 4% rule, and I think it's down to like a 3.9% rule. It depends on the interest rates, naturally, because you're going to be less aggressive in your investments. But a 3.5% withdrawal rate, that could work. Now, one of the things that we would want to do is we would have to actually subtract what we believe their taxes to be, right? Like you have 900,000, we're just going to round up to a million, make my life easy. You have $1 million that's sitting inside of your 401k. You don't have $1 million. You have whatever minus what Uncle Sam gets from your taxes, and without knowing exactly what your taxes are. So, I mean, they're around 20% right now. So we took $1 million and we divided that by we took out the 20%, and we're basically saying that Uncle Sam has 200,000, you have 800,000. So that would adjust the amount. So it's just something that we would think about. As far as your provisional Social Security tax, you're going to be at the 85% of that. So we would just keep that in mind that you're over that threshold. So you would have that. I'd probably note that. Probably wouldn't be. Some people are just often surprised that Social Security is taxed, and I understand why. You paid into it. The government has taken that, and it's been making a return off of that. So then for you to tax me when I get it back seems messed up, because you already taxed it to take it from me. But they do tax it, so I just let people know that your federal bracket, then based off of those amounts, you'd be at 12% at the 74,000 that we're talking about. And then we would look at opportunities to do those Roth conversions. So then the biggest issue that we see, our future problems, number one is going to be our RMD tax, our tax bomb. So even if we just took the $900,000 and then we assume that it grew, let's just assume it grows at like 6% every year, that's going to be over like around $1.1 million just by growing. And you'll have that by 73, and you will end up with your RMDs, which will be about $40,000 a year. So then we'll do our problems. We'll move them down here. So we would have, if you take 900K and you grow that, by the time we turn 73, that amount could be around like 1.1 million. And if it's around there, then we'll have somewhere around 40K in RMDs, depending on just the spending, right? The overall spending and the needs that we have. So that would be problem number one. Number two is the Social Security. They had started at 62. And whether we want to wait till 70, knowing that 85% of it is going to be taxed with the provisional income, is probably at least something that we should consider. So number one is going to be RMDs. Number two is going to be our Social Security optimization. Everybody feels a little bit different about it. So it's just a conversation. Like, hey, your Social Security, 85% of it is being held as taxable income. How do you feel about that? Is it in your best interest to take it now, or maybe waiting would be the best option? We haven't talked about the fact that we're married and the spouses, as we talked about a little earlier. Lots of reasons to consider. whether from the survivor perspective, or we want to help them get a little bit more, whether we're talking about the fact we started at 62 and Uncle Sam is just taxing it and taking it all back from us, just all things to really consider about or to really think about. Because if something was to happen and you guys seen the way we do the math, it was like, all right, well, if the spouse ends up living longer, depending on what the amount is that we're giving up. So for them, if they would have went from, even if we just did the higher amount, so we took Gary's and went from $2,100 to $3,800, that's about $1,700 more. So for the husband, if we went from 2,100 to 3,800, that ends up being $1,700 more. And if you just live, if it's just 10 more years, that's $170,000, right? Just 10 more years. And now I don't know. It could be less, it could be more. That's a part of the planning process. Sequence of returns, the fact that they have, as far as in their cash, we have 30K in cash, but we're living off of 74,000. That means that we have less than 6 months in cash, which is fine when you're working, but it's tougher when you're retiring. When we're retiring, we want to be able to ride out through some sort of recession. And in 6 months isn't going to, the recession isn't going to be gone in 6 months. So for them, we would probably talk about the cash reserves. And I would most likely show them the 3-bucket strategy to be able to show why we would do that. Because if we don't, we already went through it earlier, you end up with sequence of returns risk, which just means if I lose a bunch of money in the beginning, that first year, it's as if I never had the money. And a good, successful retirement is now borderline. We're just not sure that it's just gonna last anymore. So we have definitely a high risk with no buffer. And then we would look at our conversion window. Gary's talking about retiring. It's like, yeah, I want to retire in 3 years. Linda wants to retire in 2 years. They're in the 22% bracket. We would put the plan in place to, as soon as we retire, we're like, hey, let's start doing these Roth conversions, start moving the money around. Their window opens. They want to retire at 60. The window, they have a 12-year window, 60 to 72. So we would put a 12-year Roth conversion plan in place for them. And you can see how when you talk about over retirement, how the numbers they do add up. That it's like, yeah, that's not a lot, but then you're like, it sort of is. So we have the 12-year window. You have the withdrawal rate that we need. That we're sort of around that 3.5. So we feel relatively good about that. But that requires us to protect the investment. And so that is where we get the sequence of returns, which is just we got to shuffle some of the money around the way that we reallocate some of this. We just want to have more than 32,000. We want to be able to have at least 2 years set aside in cash. Then we have the RMDs where you're paying those extra amounts. If you were to pay that over a span of 10 years, I mean, that's basically going to be probably like $70,000. The amount gets higher and higher and higher the longer that we end up living. So all these are options. What we would do is we would start doing the Roth conversions first, as I already mentioned to you. And basically, we would do a small amount that we can start immediately. Right? So that would be like number 4, our solution. We would start that immediately because of the amount that they're making. We would just fill up the rest of the bracket. And that would then mean that it'd be like 30K. So you'd have the Roth conversions. That would have you paying about like 6,600 to fill up the rest of the 22% bracket. So we would do that each year over the next 3 years, which then would have, so we do that over 3 years. So that would have us now with 90K in tax-free money. And then that would have us paying 20K in taxes. Then you will not say that I told you there was no taxes. No, my friend. We're just choosing when to pay it, and we try to pay it at a lower amount. Then what we'll end up doing is now once we retire, we have the ability to say, all right, we have a larger amount that we can convert. and we can decide what makes the most sense as far as how much you need to spend and how much you have left. But let's say even if we are able to go up a little bit, so we go for, so this is year 1 through 3. Wow, I do not know what's happening with my pen down here, but it is messing up. So that's 1 through 3. Then we would shift to years 4 through 12, and we would do a 40K conversion in those years. Well, hey, you know what? We're able to live off of this, and we still have now an extra $10,000 that we can do. And we're doing this at a lower amount. So now we're doing the conversions at $12,000 because just make less. That's when their biggest windows end up opening. So over 9 years, that would be about $5,000, like 4,800. So 9 years, 5K. So you would end up having $45,000 that you would end up paying in taxes. And then that would move 450K to your tax-free bucket. Those lower years is going to be, like I said, for most of you, that'll be your window. And then for them, that'll be the 12% window. And so actually, if you go by 12%, where it's a little bit more than the 10, so it'll be about 48K in taxes is what we'll end up paying. And then we have another $450,000 now that we have moved over. So we're feeling pretty good. Converted another 450K. So now we've paid in total, looking at both of them, that's about $65,000. And then we reduced our RMDs from $40,000 to half of that, right? Because we moved about half of the money. So it went from $40,000 to $20,000. And so we're able to save on that. And that ends up being about another $80,000 worth of savings. For the Social Security, again, as I told you, it depends a lot on each of you as an individual. So that was always tough for me to just say whether it should be the full age or whether it should be at 70. But if we're doing the Roth conversions, if it's possible, then we're like, hey, we have 90% of our money that's in a taxable account that's going to be taxed at ordinary income. Maybe we don't need to touch Social Security until 70. It's going to be taxed the provisional income. It's going to be taxed 85%. We can also set this up where we start with the lower Social Security first, and we allow the larger amount to kind of keep growing. I think ultimately that's probably what we would make the most sense, because now we're able to increase what your floor is, and your floor is now covered by your guaranteed income, which then puts you in a much better situation. So that's most likely what we would end up doing. And this one, we won't know how much it ends up generating for you extra, because it's basically how long we live, right? So I don't really know. And then if the male was to pass first, and that has the spouse able to have the male's Social Security benefit, which is the higher amount, and how many years she's able to get that versus how much she would have with the lower amount. So we don't really know what that ends up being, but I've shown you the math where easily it could end up being, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars that is possible to be gathered and taken by your family from the government, from the money that it took from you earlier. And so it's a very important decision, and it is definitely one to be able to think about. And then naturally it helps us because now we have our floor that's also going up with inflation, because Social Security does adjust with inflation. You also now don't have to worry as much about having those cash reserves of bucket number one, because if we don't need the cash reserves because our Social Security is already covering it, it's basically got to do one or the other. We need to be able to get rid of that sequence of return risk. But as I also mentioned earlier, by waiting, it ends up giving your spouse a little bit of like an insurance policy. Just puts them in a pretty good spot. But otherwise, we would then say, all right, let's go ahead and have our cash buffer, whatever that looks like. Right now we have 6 months. Can we go up to a year? Can we go up to 2 years? Are you comfortable with that? And then we would say, all right, we're talking about 74,000, or 75 or something like that. So saying about $150,000. So we're gonna go from 30 to 150. Can we be able to do that and set ourselves up? And then when you look at this, you go from needing where you started at 62, where even though it was only 34,000, but now if your Social Security is covering all of it, where you have this set up and you have the tax-free money that's set aside, you have now set yourself up in a way where you would have a withdrawal rate on this account that's going to be like 1%, 2%. the chance of you running out of money now is almost slim to none, right? Like we've almost eliminated that, which is, I don't really know how to quantify that. I'll do a better job of being able to quantify that difference because we're really talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I would like to be able to give you an exact number where it's like, hey, these adjustments generates an extra $1 million in their plan. This adjustment generates an additional $3 million plan. Like, just what does that ultimately look like? Because when you're saying I can go from having to take out $40,000 from my investments each year to only having to take out $15,000 from my investments each year. Now your accounts keep growing, and they're growing by more than what you're taking out, and then you will end up with a relatively large investment. At the end, we're now retirement. Now you're trying to figure out how to spend the money, which is a great problem to have, and one that sometimes we do run into, where people are sitting there like, Dre, I don't know what to spend it on. Right? I just keep reinvesting it, and it keeps growing. So now I have a bigger problem of figuring out what to spend it on next time. This plan, I think it has a lot of potential, and because I still have 3 years even before they retire, I'd probably give it a C. Right, that would probably be my grade. With the biggest concern being that 90% of it is in the tax deferred, and you don't have any sort of a buffer, so that just puts you in a really rough spot for two of the risks that we talked about. But you don't have some of the. I mean, you have a good amount of money. You have it invested, so you're not worried as much about inflation. And you've done a good job with working, having the Social Security set up. Your withdrawal rate being at 3.5%, that's really good. So I do like that. They say, like I said, the safe amount, they say is about 3.9. So you're already in a really good spot from there. And then even when you're talking about putting all the things that we talked about in place, now we're really down around that 1%. So we're where it goes to an A. It's very hard to not see the plan as an A. You have half of the money now as tax-free money. You have a withdrawal rate that's now around 1%. Your Social Security that you've been able to increase, which now protects my spouse as well. And I was able to take those bridge years to be able to do those conversions. So now I don't have to worry about RMDs as much anymore. I don't know if we have kids or anything, so we're able to pass the wealth along. And it easily could generate at least 500,000 in benefits, but I would not be surprised if it quantified over $1 million. Right. So that is how we would do that, ladies and gentlemen. Like I mentioned, if it's something that you want, so next Thursday, if you want to have the audit, I will put the form out. I'll set it up for you, and then you can just fill out the information. Then I can go through it, and I can tell you what I see as far as maybe the quickest 3 wins that you can have set up for you. And if you all end up liking this, I'll continue to do more of them, and then maybe we could even do it where we're on the video together, which I don't know if you want to be. I wouldn't put you on the video; it would just be your voice, where you can ask questions, and then I can ask questions to better understand it, and then we can go from there. I feel pretty good about this. So you saw where the risk is. You've seen how some of the situations are. If you aren't sure where to start, the first step I would tell you to do is to go to obsidianwisdom.com, and then you can click on our Tax Smart Retirement Stage Assessment. It goes through the 7 stages of retirement. You figure out what stage you're on, and then it will tell you what the next 3 moves that you should do in your stage, the one that you would do each stage as you continue building going forward. So you're able to make sure that you keep more of your money. Because as I always say, wisdom equals freedom. And I want you to have the freedom not to be trapped in the system that has you working the rest of your life. As always, I'm thankful for your time. Hope you all have a blessed evening, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.